I don't know what it is, man, but I'm hearing out of Cleveland that Shedeur is impressing, Tom, that Shedeur Sanders is 100% in a mix for a starting quarterback job at the Cleveland Browns. I understand it's organized team activity. I understand there's a lot of shorts. There's a lot of, guys that aren't, he's throwing on air maybe, but what are you hearing out of Cleveland, Tom?
Well, let's start with this, Rich. If you said what type of quarterback is going to thrive in that environment in OTAs where it's a lot of 7-on-7, there may be some 11-on-11 mixed in, but there's no pass rush, really no pass rush. There's not helmets. You're trying to play within rhythm. It's going to be a guy who's really, really accurate, and Shedeur absolutely is. So it's not a surprise. Now I know there have been the statistics that were kept in that first OTA practice that was getting sent around. Doesn't sound like those stats were necessarily accurate, nor can you go apples to apples on one OTA practice, particularly when not all practices this time of year are open. But it would not shock me at all if we're talking about this remaining an open competition with Shedeur Sanders as a part of it as we, get up towards training camp. The real questions are going to be, Rich, if Shedeur or Dylan Gabriel, if two guys who are drafted outside of round one, typically quarterbacks drafted round 2 or later are not in the mix to start. Certainly not round 3 or later, as both these guys are. Would not surprise me if they're at least alive, because you're talking about 40-year-old Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett as the other guys in the room. But let's see where we are as we get into training camp. Let's see how the reps are divvied up. I know Kevin Stefanski, every time he's asked about who's going first and who's with the twos, just keeps saying, don't read into it. Right. It doesn't matter. It will start to matter when you get into training camp, because that's a limited number of reps. You're trying to not just figure out who your quarterback is going to be, but how do you build the rhythm and timing and tempo in the passing game? If it's all Joe Flacco with the ones as we get through the first couple weeks of training camp and into the preseason, then that would probably be a pretty strong sign that they're going to go with what everybody has thought all along would be the option. If suddenly we see that these other quarterbacks are getting opportunities, maybe they're more open-minded than perhaps it might have seemed on paper.
So why are they splitting reps in Tennessee, Tom? Like, what are you hearing from there? I mean, Will Levis even had basically admitted he's not starting for the Tennessee Titans. Quote, he was speaking this week, quote, anyone who's ever been in my situation would agree that it sucks, end quote. What's the point of bringing them along slowly or splitting reps? What do you think?
Well, I think that you look at recent history here, and if you're Brian Callahan and Chad Brinker and Mike Borgonzi, all the power players in that organization were figuring out the best way to bring along a number one pick. You can look back at recent years and say, okay, how did other teams handle these types of situations? You remember Frank Reich named Bryce Young the starter, I want to say right around this time of year. It was like early June, and he just flat out said, hey, this guy is going to be the starting quarterback. With the Bears, with Caleb Williams, there was no doubt about it. They essentially announced at the draft that, yeah, this guy's going to be starting week 1 for the team. And that's not to say that that's the reason those guys, it's certainly in Bryce's case, may have struggled out of the gate. But there is something to be said for, okay, like let's engender competition throughout the program. Let's set the tone that this is how it's going to be. We're not just going to say that's the guy, and then if Cam Ward falls flat on his face and Will Levis has some type of an epiphany and stops turning the ball over and plays great in camp, that you're going, well, we're going to play a guy who hasn't been as good in practice. You want to send the message that practice matters. Again, we've seen other coaches handle things differently. Not to equate, obviously, Frank and Matt Eberflus did not survive their first season with that number one pick quarterback. I wouldn't say that that's, a direct impact on this situation, but certainly you're looking back through, okay, what has succeeded in the past? What types of environments have these guys come into? And they obviously came to the conclusion that the best thing would be to send the message to Cam from go, even though he has tremendous work ethic. He brings people with him. He does all the things right. Still send the message, hey, we're going to start this thing out by you earning that starting job. And every expectation is that, by the time we get into the preseason, that certainly he's going to be that guy.
Okay. Catch the Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.